The first thing Marcus Hale noticed about her was that she was trying not to be noticed. That alone should have told him something. The Vetheri delegation had arrived at Outpost Keller 9 on a morning when the binary suns were aligned, which the Veth called a day of omens, and which the outpost's 43 human residents called a Tuesday. 3 shuttles, black-hulled and elegant as fish bones, had settled onto Pad 2 with a precision that made Marcus's own landing procedures look like guesswork. 12 members of the delegation emerged in a formal procession, robes of deep violet and silver, headdresses that caught the light like solar arrays, faces composed into the serene, imperious expression that the Veth wore the way humans wore clothes. And then the 13th figure stepped down the ramp last, a pace and a half behind the others, and she was trying very hard not to exist. Marcus was watching from the repair bay window, hands dark with coolant grease, a torque wrench hanging loose in his grip. He had been told to stay out of the way during the formal arrival. Chief Administrator Ewan had said it plainly. The Vetheri were here to renegotiate the mineral rights treaty that kept this outpost alive, and the last thing she needed was her best mechanic deciding this was a good moment to ask someone why their shuttle intake was making a particular kind of grinding noise. He had agreed. He was staying out of the way. Watching from the window was technically compliant. The 13th figure moved differently from the others. That was the first thing he clocked, not what she looked like, but how she moved. The other 11 delegates walked with that particular Veth quality, the one that always made Marcus think of water flowing through a perfectly maintained channel, graceful, uninterrupted, each step flowing from the last. The 13th moved with a rhythm that wasn't quite that. A slight hesitation on the left, a fractional overcorrection on the right, a pace calibrated not to flow but to conceal. She was compensating for something. He tracked the limp because that's what it was, once he saw it through the window glass as she crossed the landing pad. She was good at hiding it. She was, in fact, excellent at hiding it, in the way that someone becomes excellent at something they have spent years practicing out of necessity. But Marcus had spent 11 years repairing things for a living, and 11 years before that growing up in a house where his father fixed whatever was broken because no one else was going to. And somewhere in all of that, he had developed an eye for the precise location of a fault. He could hear it in an engine, see it in a hull plate, and apparently this was new information. He could read it in the way a person walked. She disappeared through the outpost's main entrance with the rest of the delegation. Marcus turned back to the fuel injector he was supposed to be rebuilding. He picked up the torque wrench. He set it down again. He went back to the window. She was gone. He went back to work. The Vetheri delegation was assigned quarters in the outpost's only guest wing, which was also used for storage when no guests were present, and which Chief Administrator Ewan had spent 3 days clearing out with an expression of concentrated misery. Marcus had helped move crates. He had been thanked in a tone that suggested the thanks were meant for someone else. He didn't meet the 13th delegate for 4 days. He heard her first. It was 300 station time, and Marcus was in the workshop because he slept badly when the binary suns were in alignment. Something about the electromagnetic interference played havoc with the outpost's environmental regulators, and something about that played havoc with his sleep, and he had long since given up fighting it. He came to the workshop instead. The workshop was honest. Things either worked or they didn't, and if they didn't, you figured out why, and then you fixed them. He heard the sound from the corridor outside, a rhythmic impact, a pause, a sharper impact, a pause, regular enough to be deliberate, irregular enough to be effortful. He set down his soldering iron and listened. The rhythm continued. Then there was a different sound, a sharp intake of breath, quickly controlled, and the rhythm stopped. Marcus got up and opened the workshop door. The corridor was lit at 20%, the way the outpost system always dimmed at night. In that low light he saw the 13th delegate of the Vetheri standing perhaps 6 meters away, her back to the wall, her left hand braced against it. She had changed from the formal robes she'd arrived in into something simpler, a loose tunic of dark blue, close-fitted trousers, soft-soled boots. Her headdress was gone. Without it, he could see her face clearly for the first time. Vetheri faces were humanoid in the broad strokes, bilateral symmetry, eyes in the expected position, nose in the expected place, and then diverged in ways that were subtle and cumulative. Her skin was the color of deep-sea bioluminescence, a blue so dark it was almost black, with an undertone of something that wasn't quite silver and wasn't quite green, that shifted when she moved like the surface of calm water at night. Her eyes were large, the iris a pale gold that occupied most of the visible eye, with a pupil that contracted to a narrow vertical slit in even the dim corridor light. Her ears came to a gentle point at the top. Her hair was white, worn loose now, falling past her shoulders. She was, by any honest accounting, one of the most striking people Marcus had ever seen. She was also clearly in pain. She had not yet noticed him in the doorway. She was breathing with deliberate control, in through the nose, a 3-count hold, out slowly, the kind of breathing that Marcus recognized as a person managing something rather than feeling it. Her left hand was pressed flat against the wall. Her weight was shifted hard onto her right leg. Below her left knee, the leg of her trousers was bunched slightly, and in the dim light Marcus could see the edge of something mechanical, dark metal, articulated, ending in a foot-shaped structure inside the boot. A prosthetic. Not, he noted immediately, a particularly good one. "Can I help you?" he said. She found him in the doorway in less than a second, and in that same second her posture shifted. The hand came off the wall, the weight redistributed. The face composed itself into something that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite neutral and was clearly trying very hard to be the second thing. She was good at it. She'd had practice. "I require nothing," she said. Her standard was formal and accented, the particular flat emphasis of Vetheri speakers who had learned the language from academic texts rather than conversation. "Okay," Marcus said. He leaned against his doorframe. "You're up at 300, though." "As are you." "Fair point." He didn't move from the doorway. "I'm Marcus Hale. I fix things. Workshop's mine." A pause. She was evaluating him with those pale gold eyes. He could feel the assessment, frank and direct and not unkind. "Saeli Karath," she said at last. "7th daughter of the Karath line." She said it the way people said a title when they were aware the title might not mean much to the person they were saying it to. It didn't mean much to Marcus, in the specific hierarchical sense. He knew enough about Vetheri to know that 7th daughters occupied a particular position in their social structure, which was to say, not much of one. The Veth counted their daughters in significance from first to last, and 7th was well into the territory of daughters who were provided for, kept presentable, and not expected to matter. "Nice to meet you, Saeli," he said. A slight shift in her expression. Something that might have been surprise at the direct use of her given name or at something in his tone. He kept his tone the same, easy, matter-of-fact, and waited. "The corridor," she said, with the particular precision of someone choosing words carefully, "provides a flat surface and a rail." Marcus looked at the corridor. There was no rail, but there was the long, continuous surface of the wall, which was serving as one. "You're practicing," he said. The slight shift again. "The delegation departs in 11 days. There is ground I am required to cover." "Between here and the conference room," Marcus said, because he knew this outpost's layout. "There are 3 corridors, 2 turns, and 42 meters of open space in the common area." The pale gold eyes held him for a moment. "Yes." "And the prosthetic is giving you trouble." She didn't answer. That was also an answer. Marcus looked at the device, what he could see of it from here, which wasn't much. "I could look at it," he said. "If you want, I fix things. It's what I do." Another long evaluation. Then, "It is not a mechanical fault." Okay, Marcus straightened from the doorframe. Then what is it? She was quiet for a long time. He waited. He was a patient man by nature and by training, and he understood that some things required the space to be said. The fit is incorrect, she said at last. The joint tolerances were calibrated to VETH standard parameters. I am, a pause, outside certain standard parameters. Marcus looked at her leg again. Then he looked at her face. Come into the workshop, he said. I have better light. She hesitated for a long time before she came in. He didn't push. He went back to his workbench, turned the lights up to full, and waited. After 3 minutes, he didn't time it, but he had an internal clock developed from years of knowing how long it took for things to heat, cool, pressurize, and settle. He heard the soft, uneven step in the doorway. He didn't look up from the fuel injector. You can sit on that stool. A pause, then the sound of her settling onto it. Can I see it? He asked. Another pause, then, you wish to examine the prosthetic. Yeah. It is a VETHRI medical device of the 3rd tier. It is not intended to be serviced by a human mechanic, Marcus said, still not looking up. I know. He set down the injector and looked at her now. You've been walking on it for 4 days, and it's causing you enough pain to get up at 3 in the morning to practice walking on it alone so nobody sees you. So I'd like to look at it. Her expression did something complicated. He watched it happen. A sequence of micro-adjustments that, in a human face, he would have read as someone deciding how much to trust a stranger, and which he suspected meant something not completely different in a VETHRI face. She reached down and removed the boot. Then, with movements that were practiced and efficient and completely without self-consciousness. The self-consciousness was elsewhere, he realized, not in the act itself but in being watched performing it. She released the coupling at her knee and removed the device. She set it on the workbench between them. Marcus looked at it for a long time before he touched it. It was a 3rd-tier device, as she'd said, which by VETH standards meant functional but not exceptional. The kind of thing provided to daughters of the 7th rank who required assistance but weren't expected to need the best of it. The structure was sound. The materials were good. The articulation at the ankle was well designed. But the fit was wrong. He could see it immediately. The socket, the interface between the device and what remained of her leg, had been shaped to a template, not to her. The load distribution was off. The joint was compensating with every step, and the compensation was creating a friction pattern that he could read in the wear on the internal surfaces. How long have you had this one? He asked. 8 months. And before? A slight pause. A different device. It was damaged. In an incident. She said incident the way people said a word when it was standing in for something much larger. And this one was made when? After the incident, fitted in 2 appointments. 2 appointments. He looked at the socket again. 2 appointments, he thought, was not enough to get this right. You couldn't get a fit this complex right in 2 appointments. You needed time and adjustment and patience and someone who was paying attention. Okay, Marcus said. He looked up at her. Here's what I think. I think the socket needs to be refitted. I think the ankle joint needs the tolerances recalibrated. I think you've been walking on something that's been fighting you for 8 months, and you've gotten so good at compensating for it that you might not even register it as wrong anymore. She looked at him for a long time. You can determine all of this from a brief examination. Yeah, he held her gaze. I can also be wrong, I'm not always right, but I'd like to try. You are a mechanic, she said. Not dismissive, she said it carefully, like she was making sure she had the word right. I fix things, he agreed. Ships mostly, some other things, mechanisms. He glanced at the prosthetic. This is a mechanism, a very good one mostly. It just doesn't fit you. She looked at the device on the workbench. Then she looked at him. Then she looked at the device again. The materials required for a socket refit, she said, are not standard workshop inventory. I have a lot of non-standard inventory. He nodded toward the back wall, where shelves ran floor to ceiling with components, materials, and the accumulated useful detritus of 11 years fixing things for pay and 7 years before that fixing things for free. What I don't have, I can print. I have a pretty good fabricator. The joint recalibration would require precise measurements. I have pretty good measuring tools. Another pause. The pale gold eyes moved from him to the device and back. Why, she said quietly, would you do this? Marcus considered the question. He considered giving several answers that were true but incomplete, and then he considered the fact that she had spent 4 days getting up at 300 to practice walking alone so no one would see her struggling, and he decided she probably deserved the actual answer. Because it's fixable, he said, and because it should have been right to begin with. She was quiet for a moment. Then something in her face, very subtle, very controlled, shifted in a direction that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite gratitude and was probably both. Very well, she said. If you are willing to try, I am willing to allow it. They worked by night. This was her suggestion, and Marcus understood it immediately without her having to explain it. The delegation's days were structured. Meetings, discussions, the formal choreography of a treaty negotiation that Sayeli attended as a witness, and a 7th daughter, present because absence would be irregular, not expected to speak. But the nights were her own, or close enough to it, and the nights were when she could come to the workshop without anyone from the delegation seeing her there. He understood that it mattered, the seeing. He understood it the way he understood a machine, not by feeling but by observation. The delegation treated her the way the outpost treated its maintenance tunnels, necessary, not attended to unless something went wrong, and definitely not something you mentioned in formal proceedings. She was present. She was kept presentable. She was not significant. He had opinions about this. He kept them to himself mostly. The first night he took measurements. This took longer than he had expected, not because the measurements themselves were complex, but because precision required patience, and because Sayeli had spent enough time being measured incorrectly that she had a calibrated wariness of the process. He didn't push. He explained what he was doing and why each measurement mattered before he took it, and he watched the wariness settle into something that wasn't quite trust yet but was at least willingness. She sat on the stool with the prosthetic removed and answered his questions in standard, and he asked questions in standard, and in the 6 words of Vethrai he actually knew, which made her expression do something he had not yet seen it do. You are laughing, he said. I am not laughing, she said, with the particular careful quality of someone who was laughing internally and had decided not to make it external. Your face is doing something. My face is doing nothing. Okay, he wrote down the measurement he'd just taken. What does it mean, the thing I said, the Veth word? You said roughly the measurement is honest, or the measurement does not lie. A pause. It is a phrase used by traders when they are verifying the quality of a purchase. Is that funny? It is unexpected. She watched him record the number. Most people do not tell me in advance what they intend to measure and why. Most people should, Marcus said. It's basic courtesy. He looked up. Also, if you understand why I'm taking a measurement, you can tell me if I'm taking the wrong one. The gold eyes watched him for a moment. That is a practical reason. Both things can be true. He went back to the measurement chart. After a moment she said, almost too quietly to catch, no, it is not usually done. He didn't look up, he wrote down the next number. Well, he said, we're doing it now. The second night he worked on the joint. The ankle mechanism was the most technically demanding part of the device, a small marvel of engineering, genuinely, that the Veth third-tier prosthetics division had produced. The problem wasn't the design. The problem was that the tolerances had been set to a standard gait pattern in Sayeli's gait, after however long she had been walking on a poorly fitted socket, had adapted into something that was neither the standard pattern nor her own natural one, but a compensatory hybrid that satisfied neither. He recalibrated it to her. This took 4 nights, not one. It required her to walk while he watched short distances across the workshop floor, which he could tell she found uncomfortable, not because of the walking but because of the being watched. He didn't pretend not to watch. He watched carefully and attentively and without any register in his expression that suggested he was judging what he saw, because he wasn't judging it. He was measuring it, and there is a difference, and he thought she could probably feel the difference. On the 3rd night she stopped mid-walk and said, "You are looking at the joint." "Yeah. Not at how I walk." He looked up from the joint to her face. "I'm looking at how the joint handles the load transfer at the midpoint of your stride. Right now it's compensating left instead of right, which means every time you push off, the torque is going the wrong direction, which means your hip is doing work it shouldn't have to." She was quiet for a moment. "And if you correct the torque direction, then your hip stops doing extra work." He looked back at the joint. "It won't fix overnight. You've been compensating for a long time. Muscles get used to doing the wrong thing. But if the device stops making you compensate, you can start unlearning the compensation." "How long?" "For the compensation to unlearn," he thought about it honestly. "Weeks, maybe 2 months if you're working at it. Depends on how much you walk." "I walk as much as I can," she said. "Every day." She said it quietly, matter-of-factly, with the particular quality of someone reporting a fact that has nothing to do with difficulty and everything to do with determination. Marcus looked up at her again. Something about the way she'd said it hit him in a place he hadn't been expecting. "I know," he said. "I can tell from the wear pattern." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, very slightly, and walked the remaining 4 meters to the end of the workshop and turned and walked back, and he watched the joint. He started the socket on the 5th night. This was the hardest part. Not technically. Technically, the fabricator could do most of the physical work, laying up the composite material in precise layers to the geometry he'd designed. The hard part was the geometry. The interface between a human body, or a Vetheri body. The principle was the same, and a mechanical device was a problem of surfaces that were alive and surfaces that were not, and the living surface changed, and the mechanical surface had to account for that change without requiring the living surface to hurt. He talked through the design with her, not because he needed her approval, although he wanted it, but because she knew things about her own body that no measurement he could take would capture. How the residual limb changed through the day, where the pressure points were, what positions caused the most difficulty, what she needed to do in the next week with the delegation. She answered his questions with the same careful precision she brought to everything, concise, exact, no more than was asked, but accurate. After the 2nd night of design work, he began to notice that she was also, occasionally, asking questions back. Small ones, technical ones, worked into the gaps between his questions. "What material is the outer shell?" "Modified carbon fiber composite. I'm mixing in a Vetheri structural polymer I have in inventory. It has a better load coefficient for the joint geometry." "You have Vetheri structural polymer." "I fix Rye ships sometimes. When they stop here, I keep what I might need." A pause. "You prepare for things you might need later." "Yeah," he looked up. "Doesn't everyone?" "No," she said, with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned this specifically. He went back to the geometry. After a moment she said, "The outer shell, can it be smooth?" "Yeah." "The current device is not smooth. There are visible seam lines." He looked at her. The seam lines on the current device were, he noted now that she'd said it, exactly the kind of thing that would be visible if you knew where to look, visible under the fabric of the trousers in a certain light, visible as a slightly wrong contour, visible to the kind of person who was looking for it because they knew what to look for. I can make it smooth, he said. I'll need one more measurement to match the surface geometry to the right leg profile. She looked at him for a moment with the gold eyes. Then she said, "Thank you." He didn't say it was nothing because it wasn't nothing, and she would know it wasn't nothing, and he didn't want to reduce it. He just nodded and went back to the design. The delegation's conduct lead came to find him on the 7th day. Marcus was under a shuttle, the Veth delegation's second craft, which had developed an intermittent resonance issue in the port thruster, housing that the Veth's own technicians had been unable to isolate. He had been asked, with the particular stiff politeness of people asking for help they didn't want to ask for, if he could look at it. He could. He was under it when he heard the footsteps stop beside the landing strut. He rolled out. The Veth who stood there was older by Veth standards, which meant the silver in the hair was more pronounced, the gold of the eyes more deeply set, and had the bearing of someone who had been important for a long time and expected the world to arrange itself accordingly. Marcus recognized the type. He had fixed ships for this type many times. "You are the mechanic," the Veth said, standard accent even more pronounced than Saeli's. "Hail." "That's me." Marcus sat up, set his diagnostic tool across his knees. "You're getting a resonance in the port thruster at about 700 cycles per second. It's a mount, not a housing issue. I can have it fixed by tomorrow." The Veth's expression indicated that this was satisfactory but not the point of the visit. "I am Advisor Kethan. I coordinate the delegation's affairs." A pause. "It has come to my attention that you have been spending time with the 7th daughter." Marcus wiped his hands on a cloth. He took his time with it. "She comes to the workshop sometimes." "She does," the advisor said. "I would like to understand the nature of those visits." "She's been helping me with some calibration work." This was technically true. He'd asked for her input on the joint tolerances. It counted. "The 7th daughter," the advisor said, with the careful emphasis of someone managing a diplomatic situation, "is not a member of the technical staff. She is here in a ceremonial capacity. Her time and her associations are," a pause, "a matter of the delegation's concern." Marcus looked at the man for a moment. "Is she okay?" he asked. "Is she all right?" The question seemed to catch the advisor slightly off balance. "She is. Because if something's happened to her, I want to know." He kept his voice even and easy, the same voice he used when he was asking a shuttle why it was making a noise it shouldn't be making. "If she's fine, then she's an adult who can choose how to spend her evenings, and I don't think the delegation's concern overrides that." A long pause. The advisor's expression did several things in rapid succession. "She is," the Veth said finally, carefully, "not a person whose associations reflect on the delegation." "Okay," Marcus picked up his diagnostic tool. "So it's not the delegation's concern then." He went back under the shuttle. He told her about it that night. He thought she should know. She was quiet for a moment after he finished. She was sitting on the stool, the new socket in the fabricator running its final cure cycle, and she had her hands folded in her lap with the particular stillness that he had come to recognize as her thinking. "He said I do not reflect on the delegation," she said. "Yeah." He meant it as a fact, as something obvious that did not need stating. "Yeah." A silence. "He is correct," she said. "I am the 7th daughter. I have no standing in negotiations. I hold no rank that the other courts will notice. I was brought because 7 daughters from the Kareth line is an auspicious number for a treaty, and I am the 7th. Marcus looked at the fabricator. The cure cycle read, 40 minutes remaining. "That's," he said, "a really bad reason to treat someone like they don't matter." She looked at him. "It is the custom." "I know." He kept his eyes on the fabricator. "I've met a lot of customs that were bad reasons. They're still bad reasons." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your customs are different. Some of them are better. Some of them are different kinds of bad." He glanced at her. I'm not saying humans have everything figured out. I'm saying this one is wrong. She held his gaze. The gold eyes were doing something he couldn't quite name, complex and layered, like light through deep water. You say what you think, she said. It was not a criticism. When I know what I think, yeah. He turned back to the fabricator. I'm not always sure. You are sure about this? Yeah, he said. About this I'm sure. The new socket was finished on the 8th night. He had made it smooth. He had matched the surface geometry to her right leg as closely as his measurements allowed. He had calibrated the joint with the corrected torque values. He had adjusted the load distribution to account for the wear patterns in her current gait, and then recalibrated it slightly against where her gait would be once she unlearned the compensations. A bet on her future, a small mechanical optimism. She put it on in the workshop. He watched her face as she did it. She was good at not showing what she felt, but she was learning in these 8 nights together in this workshop at 300 station time that he wasn't watching to judge. He was watching to know if it was right. Her expression when she stood was not quite neutral. Walk to the door, he said. She walked to the door. There was no hesitation. The step was even. The hip was moving correctly, he could see it, could see the absence of the extra work she'd been doing. She reached the door and turned and walked back. She stopped in front of him. She was looking at her own feet, or at the workshop floor, or at something he couldn't see. It doesn't hurt, she said. Her voice was quiet. Something in it was almost wondering, the way someone sounds when they'd forgotten specifically what a thing felt like when it didn't hurt, and then the memory comes back. That's what it should feel like, Marcus said. She looked up at him. The gold eyes were bright, and he would have been willing to take a significant bet that in any other context, in any other light, in any situation where she felt observed, she would have already controlled what he was currently seeing in her face. But in the workshop at 300 with him, she let it be there for a moment. Thank you, she said. The 2 words were careful and exact and meant everything they said. You're welcome, Marcus said. She walked the length of the workshop 4 more times. Then she stopped and looked at him again. The delegation meets tomorrow, she said. Final session. Then we depart in 3 days. I know. I will walk 42 meters of open space. Yeah, he looked at her. You'll be fine. You cannot know that. Sure I can. He allowed himself a small smile. I just spent 8 nights on the joint tolerances. I know what this device is going to do. You'll be fine. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then something in her expression resolved, settled, like a mechanism finding the correct position. Marcus Hale, she said. You said you fix things. Yeah. You are also, she paused, choosing the word, honest, in what you see and what you say. He thought about that. I try to be. It is not a common thing, she said, in my experience. I'm sorry about that. Don't be sorry. She met his eyes directly, the gold iris steady and clear. Simply continue to be as you are. He nodded once. She nodded once. She turned and walked to the door, and the walk was different, even, unhurried, the hip working correctly, the step without hesitation. She stopped at the door. The treaty session, she said, without turning around. The 7th daughter is not expected to speak. Okay. A pause. I have been thinking about what you said. About what something being a custom does not make it. Yeah. She turned then, just slightly, just enough for him to see her profile. I have been thinking that perhaps I have allowed certain things to remain unchallenged because they were presented as facts, when they were only customs. He waited. There may be things I have to say, she said. In the session tomorrow, things that have not been said. A pause. I am thinking about it. Okay, he said. She left. Marcus stood in the workshop for a moment in the quiet. Then he went back to the fuel injector. He watched the final treaty session from the observation room. This was technically not allowed. He had been told by Chief Administrator Ewan, with even more specificity than the first time, that the treaty sessions were for delegation members and outpost officials only, and that his presence in any official capacity during negotiations was absolutely not required and genuinely not wanted. The observation room was above the conference chamber, accessible by a maintenance corridor, and was primarily used to run environmental checks on the conference space. It was not, strictly speaking, an official capacity. The session had been running for 2 hours when he arrived. Through the observation glass he could see the delegation arranged in the formal configuration. The primary negotiators facing the outpost's administrative team, the secondary members arrayed behind them, and at the back of the Veth side, slightly to the left, the seventh daughter of the Kareth line. She was sitting very still. She was sitting with the stillness he had come to know, the stillness of someone thinking. He watched. The session went on. He caught fragments through the glass. The conference room audio was not piped to the observation space, so he had lip reading and body language and context to work with, which was usually enough. He watched the Veth primary negotiators. He watched Administrator Ewan's careful expressions. He watched Advisor Kethin, who sat slightly behind the primary negotiators and whose role, Marcus had gathered, was to ensure nothing that wasn't supposed to happen happened. He watched Sayeli. She was still for a long time. Then, approximately 40 minutes after he arrived, she was not still. She rose from her seat. In the conference room below, something happened to the atmosphere. He could see it without hearing it. Heads turned. The primary negotiators paused. The advisor's expression became very controlled very quickly. Sayeli walked to the primary negotiator's position. She walked across the open floor. 42 meters would have been generous. This was perhaps 20, but it was open and observed and formal, and she walked it with the new device. And the new device did exactly what he had built it to do, and her step was even and her posture was upright and the hip was working correctly, and there was no hesitation, and there was no limp. She said something. He couldn't hear it. He watched the faces, the Veth negotiators, surprise and something more complex. Administrator Ewan, focused attention. The advisor, a rigidity that suggested things were not proceeding according to plan. She said more. Whatever she was saying it the way she said things to him in the workshop, carefully, precisely, no more than was needed, but accurate. Complete, uncompromising. She spoke for what his internal clock estimated at 6 minutes. When she finished, the conference room was quiet. He could feel the quiet even through the observation glass. The lead Veth negotiator said something. The lead Veth negotiator's expression had changed in a way Marcus couldn't fully interpret but which looked, in its general direction, like reappraisal, like someone revising an assumption. Administrator Ewan said something. Ewan's expression was that of someone who had just been handed information they hadn't expected and was making extremely rapid use of it. The advisor said nothing. His expression said a great deal. Sayeli returned to her seat. She sat down with the stillness he knew. She did not look up at the observation room. She had no reason to know he was there. He stayed until the session ended. Then he went back to the workshop. She came that night, later than usual after 400. The session went long, she said from the doorway. I noticed, Marcus said. From the workbench where he was finishing the fuel injector he had been theoretically working on for 9 days. She came in and sat on the stool. She was in the formal robes again, the headdress still in place. She looked, he thought, the way someone looks after they've done something that took everything they had and they're checking to see if they still exist on the other side of it. I spoke, she said. Yeah, he set down the injector and turned to face her. How did it go? She was quiet for a moment. There are 3 provisions in the treaty that have been disadvantageous to your outpost. disadvantageous in ways that were not accidents. They were inserted by Advisor Kethen during the preliminary discussions, before your administrator was present, and they have been presented since as settled terms. Marcus kept his face neutral. Okay. They are not settled. They are not equitable. I presented the documentation of their insertion and the correct precedent law. A pause. I know the treaty records because I read them. I read them because I had nothing else to do, being a seventh daughter without responsibilities. Another pause. I read the law because I studied it. For 7 years. I was not expected to use it. But you know it. I know it completely. She looked at him. The 3 provisions will be renegotiated. Administrator Yuan has the documentation. The delegation has agreed to the review. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The advisor, he said. The advisor is very displeased. The ghost of something crossed her face. He told me when the session ended that I had embarrassed the delegation, that a 7th daughter's role was to be present and to be silent. A pause. He said a number of other things. What did you say to him? She held his gaze. I told him that his assessment of my role was a custom, not a fact, and that I was revising my relationship to certain customs. Marcus held her gaze. Something moved in his chest that he identified with some precision, as a feeling he didn't entirely have a name for, something in the vicinity of pride, but not quite pride, because it wasn't his to feel, and something in the vicinity of recognition, because she had said something in the session room that had started in this workshop, and he knew where it started. Good, he said. She looked at him for a moment. The gold eyes were steady. I wanted to tell you something, she said, before we depart. Okay. When you offered to look at the prosthetic, she said slowly, working through the words with care, I thought it was strange. I thought perhaps you had a reason I could not identify. People do not generally, she paused, attend to things about me that are not required. I know, Marcus said. I have come to understand, she said, that you did not have a reason beyond the one you stated, that you saw something that was not right and wished to correct it, that this is simply how you are. He waited. I wanted you to know, she said, that it mattered, that you were honest about what you saw, that you explained what you were doing, that you, she stopped and found the words, allowed me to be a person with information about my own situation, rather than a situation to be managed. The workshop was quiet. The fabricator was quiet. Outside, the binary suns were past the resonance hours, and the environmental system had settled back to normal. Thank you for saying that, Marcus said. I am accurate, she said. It came out with a slight edge of wryness, her own voice, the one she had shown him in pieces over 8 nights. I am only accurate. He smiled. She looked at his smile for a moment, and then something in her face allowed itself to mirror it, very slightly, very carefully, and then a little less carefully. If I return, she said, with the delegation in the next review cycle, she paused. The treaty requires a 6-month review. I know, he said. I read the public terms. There would be a reason, she said, for a 7th daughter to return for oversight purposes. A pause. The provisions require monitoring. That makes sense, Marcus said. I would need to examine the records, she said, on site. Over several days. The guest wing has space. The workshop, she said, would also be accessible if there were questions of a technical nature. He looked at her. She looked at him. The gold eyes held the warmth of someone who was saying a precise thing and meaning every word of it and a few words adjacent to it that she had not quite said. The workshop, Marcus said, is always open. She rose from the stool. She stood for a moment, the posture perfect, the new device doing exactly what it was made to do. She looked at him with the direct, frank assessment he had grown accustomed to, the assessment that was not a verdict but an attention, genuine and complete. Marcus Hale, she said. You said you fix things. Yeah. You have, she said, on this occasion, fixed something that extended considerably beyond the mechanism. He thought about saying something modest or practical or technically accurate about what he had and hadn't done. He thought about her walking across 42 meters of open space in the conference room, her step even and her posture upright, and the advisor's expression doing exactly what it had been doing. He thought about her sitting on the stool for 8 nights and answering precise questions and asking them back, and the ghost of wryness in her voice when she said she was only accurate. He said, "You did most of it." "We did most of it," she corrected. The slight wryness was more visible now. "I am accurate." "You're accurate," he agreed. She inclined her head, a Veth gesture, formal but warm, which she had not used with him before. It looked like it meant something specific. He made a note to find out. Then she left. The workshop was quiet. Marcus turned back to the fuel injector. He picked it up, looked at it for a moment, and then set it back down. He pulled out his maintenance log and opened a new entry. He wrote in the field for notes, ankle joint tolerances calibrated, socket refitted, 6-month review scheduled. He looked at what he'd written for a moment, then he added below it, working correctly. He closed the log. Outside, the suns were rising. Through the workshop's single porthole window, the first one cleared the horizon in a wash of bronze and amber, the kind of light that made the landing pads look like something from a painting. The second sun, the smaller one, followed it up pale gold, like a very particular color of eyes in a very particular quality of light. Marcus picked up the fuel injector. He fitted the first component. He listened to the soft, exact sound of it seating correctly. He smiled at the injector, which had no opinion about this, and got back to work. He didn't expect the knock. In 11 years at Outpost Keller 9, Marcus had established a kind of ambient reputation as the person you came to when something was broken and you were out of other options. This meant he received a certain number of visitors to the workshop, delegation technicians, outpost staff, occasionally a passing trader whose ship was making a sound it shouldn't be making. But those visitors knocked with the brisk, task-oriented rap of someone who wanted a problem solved and had a schedule. The knock he heard at 1400, the day after the treaty session, was different in character. Tentative wasn't quite right. Deliberate was closer. The knock of someone who had decided to knock and was following through on the decision, but was aware that the decision was unusual. He set down his soldering iron. "Come in." The door opened. It was not Sayeli. It was a Veth woman he didn't recognize. Older, her silver hair worn in the formal style of someone withstanding in the delegation, her expression doing the thing the advisor's expression sometimes did, where the blankness was so thorough it became its own kind of information. "You are Hale," the woman said, standard precise. "Yeah," Marcus studied her, "and you're?" "Merv Kareth," she paused, "the third daughter." Marcus looked at her. The third daughter. He knew enough to know that the third daughter was significantly closer to the operational center of the Kareth line than the seventh, not the first two, who held formal positions but close enough to matter. "What can I do for you?" he said. She stepped into the workshop. She looked around it with the particular survey of someone assessing an environment, not decorating it. Her gaze moved over the shelves, the fabricator, the workbench, the diagnostic tools. It was a thorough look, the kind of look that noticed things. "My sister," she said, "walked across the conference room floor today." Marcus waited. "I have not seen her walk like that," Mervta said, "in 4 years." He kept his expression neutral and his voice easy. "She's been working hard." "She has been working hard for 4 years. Mervta looked at him. "That is not what changed." A silence. "What you built for her," Mervta said. "The fitting, the calibration." "The device was a good design," Marcus said. "It just needed adjustment." "I spoke to the Veth technicians who fitted the current device," Mervta said. They told me the calibration was within standard parameters, that the fit was appropriate for a seventh daughter. Marcus looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up. With respect, that's a political statement dressed up as a technical one. Mervta held his gaze. Her expression was doing something different now, less managed, more present. Yes, she said. It is. He waited. I did not, she said carefully, pay sufficient attention to my sister's situation. That is a thing I am telling you because I believe in accuracy, and because you are a person who, from what I understand, also values it. A pause. I am telling you that I failed in something, because it is true. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I appreciate that, he said. He meant it. I am also telling you, Mervta continued, that what Sayeli said in the session today, the provisions, the documentation, she was correct. I read the records she cited afterward. She was entirely correct. I know. Mervta looked at him. You knew. She mentioned she'd been studying the records. I didn't know the specifics, but he paused, choosing the word thorough. Something in Mervta's expression shifted, a small recalibration. She studied law for 7 years, she said quietly. When she was injured, when she was recovering, she needed something that did not require her legs. A pause. We did not ask what she needed it for. Marcus felt the weight of that land. He let it land. He didn't fill the space it made. She needed it for this, Mervta said. Apparently. Yeah, Marcus said, apparently. The third daughter stood in his workshop for a moment longer, looking at something he couldn't see, the fabricator, or the middle distance, or 4 years she was reckoning with in some private interior accounting. The device, she said, if we return for the review cycle, if she returns. The workshop will be here, Marcus said. Mervta looked at him directly. She is not incidental, she said. It was the most complete sentence she had said since she came in. It had the quality of something being corrected precisely, with full intention. I know, Marcus said. I am beginning to know it also, Mervta said. She left with the same deliberateness she had arrived with, the knock reversed. The door closed quietly, the corridor receiving her back into the delegation's world. Marcus stood in the workshop. He went back to the soldering iron. The delegation departed on a Thursday. Pad 2 at 800, the dual suns at their familiar angle, the 3 black-hulled shuttles arranged as they had arrived. Marcus was in the repair bay again, as he had been 10 days ago, but he was not watching from the window. He was standing at the entrance to Pad 2, arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe, which was technically the exterior of the repair bay, and thus technically not the same thing. 11 delegates emerged from the guest wing in the formal procession. At the rear, a pace and a half behind the others, walked the 12th. She wasn't trying to be invisible. This was the difference, and it was stark, and he felt something about the starkness, felt it in the chest, that specific location, the same place as before but fuller. Her step was even. Her posture was upright. The hip was working correctly. She had her headdress on, the formal robes, all of it, and she walked through the morning light of the binary suns and across the landing pad with the precision of a mechanism calibrated exactly to specification. She was not last. She walked to the second position in the procession, the one traditionally occupied by the third daughter. Mervta was beside her, a half step to the right. Marcus watched. He did not wave. That would have been outside the appropriate register for the situation, the size of the thing. As she reached the shuttle ramp, Sayeli paused. It was a brief pause, almost incidental, the kind of pause someone makes when they've remembered something they meant to do before leaving. She turned. She found him in the doorway of the repair bay across the pad, which was perhaps 30 meters, which was not close. The pale gold eyes found him with the same directness she brought to everything, the frank assessment, the full attention. She held it for 3 seconds. Then she inclined her head. The Veth gesture. The one that was formal but warm, that she had not used with him before the last night, that he had made a note to find out the meaning of. He had asked Administrator Ewan about it that morning, in the specific way of someone who needed factual information and had found a knowledgeable source. Ewan had told him, with a slightly speculative expression, that it was a Veth gesture used between equals when parting, that it carried a connotation of continuity, of an interaction that was not ending but pausing, that it implied the assumption of a next meeting. Marcus returned it. He was fairly certain he did it wrong. His neck was not as flexible as a Veth's, and the angle was probably off, but he returned it. She turned and walked up the ramp, the shuttles sealed, the engines lit. The landing pad cleared. Administrator Ewan appeared at Marcus's elbow. She was silent for a moment, watching the shuttles lift. "The 3 provisions," she said, without looking at him. "Yeah. The review of those provisions is going to save this outpost a significant amount in raw mineral taxation over the next 5 years. A pause. Significant. Good, Marcus said. The documentation she presented was airtight. The precedent citations were textbook. Another pause. Nobody expected the 7th daughter to do that. I expect, Marcus said, watching the 3 black shapes grow smaller against the binary sky. That's something that's going to be revised going forward. Ewan looked at him. Her expression had the slightly speculative quality it sometimes had when she was working something out. She spent a lot of time in your workshop. She needed some work done on a device. A prosthetic. Yeah. Ewan was quiet for a moment. You know, she said, I once told you that your job was to fix things when they were broken and to stay out of the way the rest of the time. You've told me that several times, Marcus agreed. I'm revising that assessment. She looked at the sky where the shuttles had become 3 specks. There's a treaty review in 6 months. The Kareth delegation will return. I know. The guest wing will need to be prepared. She paused. And the workshop inventory should probably be stocked for any maintenance needs that might arise. Marcus looked at her. Ewan's expression was carefully neutral in the manner of someone who was making an administrative observation and not an editorial one. I'll see to it, he said. She nodded once and walked back to the administrative block. Marcus stood in the repair bay entrance until the 3 specks had disappeared entirely into the bronze and gold of the binary morning. Then he turned back to the workshop. The stool was still in the same position she always sat in. He didn't move it. He walked to the bench, picked up the fuel injector, finally, genuinely finished now, all components seated correctly, all tolerances exact, and fitted it into its housing. He turned it. It locked in place with the soft, definitive sound of a mechanism functioning as intended. 6 months was a reasonable amount of time. In 6 months, he could make sure the workshop was stocked properly. He could look at the outpost's terrain route between Pad 2 and the conference room and see if any of the floor surfaces needed leveling. He could spend a bit of time learning Vethri, more than 6 words. He could find out what other Veth gestures meant what. He could have the fuel injector back together by lunchtime and move on to the thruster housing, which had been waiting patiently, and which would probably take most of the afternoon, and which he was genuinely looking forward to. Marcus Hale picked up the next component. He fixed things, that was what he did. You found the fault in the mechanism, in the fit, in the assumption that something was only worth a certain kind of attention, and you corrected it. And then you checked that the correction held, and when it held, you moved to the next thing. The next thing was always there, waiting. He looked forward to it.